Hello all, I'm Lisa Lande and I'm here today to talk about resilience. I first want to say thank you so much for all participating. I am honored to be a part of this Excel Summit and will do my best to provide something that is not only thought-provoking but could actually manifest into real operational changes within the way your organizations run and the way that we are attempting to realize safety within our organizations. So if you bear with me, I'm going to attempt to share my slides with you. And again, we're talking about safety and context, and maybe there's two avenues toward realizing resilience. I mean, when we think back of traditional ways that we've approached safety in the organization, there's a great reliance on efficiency, right? If we can do the job as defined and progress efficiently, then it will be done not only safely, but to great financial and production benefit. And so that is kind of our mode of operandi. Yet with everything that has happened within our societies, within the world generally, with COVID, the impact on the economy, on how we're working and how that's become integrated with life, it's made us recognize that efficiency actually can inhibit our ability of feeling safe, and that one's ability to adapt to these unknowns that are confronting us actually bring a different sense of safety. And that's kind of the big picture of this. So my intent is to take us through kind of a high level view of resilience from these two different perspectives, and then hone down into how does that manifest in the workplace, and how could that lead us to a greater sense of well-being within our organizations and even society. So the other day I was on Twitter. Social media has become a real plus in the way of maintaining relationships that are actually turning out to be quite valuable and meaningful and robust and allow us the time to think and reflect. Anyway, I came across this tweet by the Prime Minister of Morocco, and that is one of the smaller states that participate as a member state within the United Nations. And I was just so pleased to see that they recognize we're in this together, that the way to maintain safety and production is really coming from a place of resilience, and that if we are just cohesive in the way that we're thinking about well-being and hence productivity coming from it, that we can sustain, not just exhaust all the resources today, but actually sustain prosperity. And so, this led me to reflect on kind of our traditional means of approaching safety in a technological paradigm, right? We flip a switch, it's on, we flip a switch, it's off. There's, just one linear approach to the way we conduct business. And even many of our methodologies, if you move even into the support organizations within, our operations, even they are prescribed and they define kind of what the procedures are. Certainly when we get into a closed system, if you're working in high hazard work, if you're working in nuclear, it's so geared toward technology and maintaining safety in this very linear controlled fashion. That's great in a closed system when we know the parameters. However, that's a complicated system. We have simple systems too. A leads to B, one goes to two. And the more complicated, they're also linear, but there's just so many relationships there. It can be quite cumbersome and complicated to keep track of them, yet they all connect. When we talk about a complex system, these are nonlinear systems. And, at no one time does any relationship from one variable to another actually repeat itself. But they kind of can come back around and you do see trends, yet it's never the same. And so there's these gross differences in a complex system versus a complicated system. So I'm going to kind of describe the differences between the two because I've been exploring these differences between a technological system and an ecological system. And I'm going to credit David Snowden, who's the brains behind Sinophen, who had one day in passing on a webinar said, yeah, I hope in organizations one day that we can move from a technological paradigm to an ecological one. And he went on with his talk, but I thought, well, that's an interesting thing. What the heck is ecological? And in a moment, I'll introduce you to it in case you, like I, didn't really know what that meant. But let's first talk about our traditional technological system, and in your mind, kind of play this against how your organization works. In a technological system, we're talking about complicated activities. Sometimes they're simple. But when you have all these different areas within the organization working together, if we call the organization a system, or whether you're talking about a machine and all the parts that go into a machine, whenever we're looking at a system in a complicated fashion, it's seen as linear. That one compartment leads to another compartment, or one component is related to another compartment, and they have a direct relationship on each other. They always operate by fixed rules and guidance and guidelines and procedures, and we don't like those to be diverged from. We count on those systems to be stable and constant. And if something goes awry, we want to be able to reverse it, maintain that stability. So the functions are very near. A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. And all those relationships, again, are organized and in a single equilibria of continuity. They have centralized controls, and their primary mode of operandi or goal is about efficiency. We all know these to be true. What you're looking at here is the way that safety is managed this is in Asia Pacific. We manage traffic with 1 million different lights, and this is the way we control for the variables of all these moving entities that are coming in on the roads, all right? It's complicated, but it's linear. So now let's compare it to an ecological system. I did a lot of research on ecology, and basically what it is, it's organisms within an environment. Humans are an organism. We react and respond in a very nonlinear way to the cues and the variables that present themselves at any one moment, and they're never the same. Usually when we think of ecosystems, we think of forests or we think of the seas. And they're very finely balanced. If one aspect of the system gets out of whack, it tends to be compensated for as well as shift the rest of the ecosystem. Humans operate in an ecosystem. When new cues come at us, like what's happening in the world with COVID and then the impact that it's had on, the economy and our jobs and how we're living and working, we adapt. We flexibly adapt because we are in our DNA and our evolution programmed to react in a way that puts us on a success path. So something episodic like COVID absolutely shifts us to be able to survive. And only if the system is completely overwhelmed and shut down does it never come back. But we know even when we've had nuclear disasters or when Earths have been devastated by serious environmental impacts, we tend to have life form again. We're resilient that way. So everything about an ecological system is towards sustainability. Let's talk about safety quickly within these paradigms too. In an engineering paradigm, the goal is to identify and manage the risks that exist there. The focus is on what can go wrong. And if I can identify what can go wrong, I can manage it, right? I can control it. And remember that word manage when we come to how to operationalize this. The goal is to pinpoint where those failure points are in a linear system so we can then regulate and control it. And what we tend to do, even though we're humans, there's a part of us that likes linear and responds well to linear, and our systems internally are even quite linear. We want to regulate and prescribe all of the elements that go into functioning effectively. So we often have these detailed and extensive work processes, and the structures give us a sense of stability, right? That gives us a sense of safety. That's all well and good in a closed system where all the variables are known and you have pretty much standard approaches all the time. That's not how life works. But let's remember, this is the primary operating platform of organizations. Well, yesterday, still a bit today, yet definitely yesterday. And here's why it's changing. Because when we talk about safety within an ecological paradigm, we adapt towards success. When the system is stressed, it doesn't shut down. It doesn't need to be reprogrammed to go back to where it was. It reformulates itself. It adapts to the new context, right? It navigates through the risk that was just brought to us. So it requires a bit looser parameters. And this is the interesting contrast and even dilemma, if you will, between operating only within a technological paradigm, because those are very tight parameters. In an ecological paradigm, when we're talking about human and living organisms, looser parameters allow us the freedom to find our success path. So it requires an ability to adapt in order to bring stability. And it's the adaptation, it's a movement itself, and the freedom to move that equates to safety, a very different animal than we saw in the technological system. So the resilience within a technological system is all about efficiency. And these are fail-safe designs. We want to design those systems so that they never fail, because it's a lot of work to get them back to operating normal protocols. So we want to maintain that equilibrium. And we measure resilience by the resistance to the disturbance and how quickly we can get it back to working. A system shuts down, bring in the repair person, get it working back up, right? That's how we measure resilience in a technological system. If we compare that to ecological resistance, it's really safe to fail. We're constantly exploring. It's not even safe to fail, it's safe to learn. Every time we're confronted with some obstacle, that's the beauty of resilience. We get stronger. It's like, bring it on. Let's not see the world through the failure lens. Let's see it through the learning lens. And how do we recalibrate, not back to normal as it was, but a new normal? What is our new equilibrium? And you see it every day in the way that we're adapting to COVID and all the changes that that has brought on for us, including this webinar and me taping it and leading it virtually. So the change outcome is really a new normal, a never normal, right? Let's talk about VUCA for a minute. If you don't know what that is, VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And this was introduced way back in the 80s, maybe even the 70s, and I'll get to the author in a bit. I'm blanking on his name. Please forgive me. But he introduced it because he recognized that, organizations were having to deal with more ambiguity as technology was increasing. It was actually paradoxically, yes, simplifying life, but also adding complexity. And then all the environmental stuff started, etc. So the consequences of VUCA, especially in a technological system, again, closed system, right? VUCA, not good, is it makes it unstable, unreliable. It brings in a lot of unknowns. And the response to that are a few, but only a few. We can either have a redundant system that kicks in if the system goes down. Think of a backup system in a nuclear plant, right? To keep the core protected, and it keeps the nuclear device running. Or we have a passive system like a seatbelt that, if we're in a car accident, will come in and protect us. Or the system just shuts down. That's too great a risk, and we work in those system. We work that into the system. So there aren't many options, but there are some. The bottom line is technological systems don't do well in VUCA. If we compare that, though, with an ecological system, VUCA clearly has negative consequences that then translate to something positive. So it does lead to instability, anxiety, confusion, insecurity. On the other hand, once we adapt, as we do in an ecological system, we resile. We actually act to create a new success path, to take action, to be in control, to create a new safety. When we have anxiety due to the uncertainty, we actually demonstrate greater care and empathy. It really leverages the connections to others. And when there's complexity and it brings on confusion, again, we just try and adapt to it. We find new success measures. With ambiguity, we increase our radars. We start attending to different cues. And this gives us a sense of control that overcomes the insecurity and the doubt. So we're incredibly resilient within an ecological system. So when we're talking complicated versus complex in the environment, and my hope is, as I've been describing the ecological system, you recognize all of that is also functioning within the organization and within society. But what do we tend to operate from? We operate from a complicated technological system primarily. But like Snowden said, we want to make a shift to a complex ecological system. I kind of respectfully don't agree. Both of these are true. Both of these systems operate internally to us as well as externally in the world. So it can't be an either or, it has to be an and. And the goal is, how do we start recognizing that both of these systems exist and coexist and really optimize their ability to bring out safety in a very comprehensive way. So this is where I want to start talking about the application and the operationalization of these systems within the workplace. How can we, I'm going to go from the bottom up, have safe to fail learning and development initiatives? You know what, people? We're already doing it. I saw the greatest, it was on LinkedIn actually, and it was a post where the dad was at his computer and his baby was sitting on his lap, and he had this cool little image where it said work life, like a balance scale that was to the side. It was just the coolest image. And that itself is a safe to fail initiative. It's how can I adapt my life in order to work? And what we're seeing, which is a really amazing kind of adaptation here, and I had written about this a few years ago, is this, we talk about life and work as if they're in distinct categories in a very linear way, right? In a technological paradigm, we think of work and life as very distinct and keep it that way and don't bring life into work. That's bogus. It's not viable. It'll never happen. And if anything has made us recognize that the ecological non-linear relationships of everything is holding true, it was that picture of this dad with his baby on his lap, caring for the baby and doing his work. We're all living through this. So this kind of integration and also, seeing everything that we're going through as a safe to fail is a wonderful way to grow and adapt and become more resilient. Here's another one that's happening, whether you know it or not, but I want you to be more conscious of it. You are making these adaptations in an ecological paradigm every day that you're adapting to this new way of working and living. I urge you to start being conscious of it. I want you to be on the dance floor, doing the activity, sitting with your baby while you're doing your work, but also recognize the process that you're going through in your effort to succeed and to adapt. Now, also recognize that you're not letting the technological organizational paradigm go completely. You are still striving to have some linear control in your life, to get control where you can. Both are necessary. So let me talk about another safe to fail that you can introduce into the workplace if you have any influence over maybe your HR, your learning and development organizations. We had done this at Los Alamos National Laboratory and other Department of Energy labs for quite a few years. What we did was we created scenarios where there were knowns, and participants who were in the workshops, mostly managers, but leaders and, just people who wanted to grow and develop who would come to these. They had a described event that was going to occur. They would know what they were going to walk in loosely. But then there were some unknowns that were introduced, and they had to navigate through that as best they could. What was unique about it is they worked with 4 or 5 other participants, and they each had turns of being the one who had to manage whatever the situation was, and the situations rotated. But after the 10 minutes or so they played the scenario, everyone backed away and had a few minutes to kind of reflect on what did they do to actually manage and navigate the situation. What went well and what could have gone better and why and what was the outcome. So it was a very safe to fail opportunity to reflect on the linear and the nonlinear and how they integrated, and then keep doing it through the couple of days of scenarios and workshop. It was amazing, the transformation of participants seeing the world and safety more broadly, right? In both linear and nonlinear ways. And seeing safety as not only about whether the bottles were labeled correctly, but whether Mary and Joe were sharing critical information and were trusting each other and developing a relationship where they promoted work safely and productively together. So it was the relational safety and the operational safety, right? The physical, tangible safety and those interpersonal safety aspects. How can you create those safe to fail learning opportunities? You have my email address. You can always contact me. I'm happy to talk through other ways that you can create these safe to fail opportunities to integrate both a technological and an ecological paradigm. The other is, let's go to the top now, to have more targeted safety efforts and adaptive controls within the environment. And what that means is, you start to identify in a very conscious way where we have critical steps that must be controlled in a linear fashion, and where some of what has been operationalized or proceduralized, reduced to simple steps when really it's an ecological interpersonal function, can be separated. And where do we really need linear modalities to control? And where can it be more effective to have more adaptive and free running controls? This also empowers employees to get engaged and not feel that they are being told what needs to be done. I want to talk also about mental and emotional safety. When we start to focus on the ecological side of safety, right, and the way that we're working and living, we recognize that that internal makeup, that ability to feel that they have control of one's environment and be able to know where they need control and where they need freedom to maneuver, brings a sense of peace and ease and safety internally, emotionally. We are not spending enough time here. And so how can we start thinking conscientiously about, again, discriminating where we need the controls in the technological type of approach and where we can have more adaptive, empowered control of the individuals to maneuver more freely, to retain a sense of control. Going back to the safe to fail, working at home, being able to live and work and manage our calendars as we see fit, and being trusted to perform in a way that optimizes our individual values and our individual gifts and expertise, brings an incredible sense of intellectual and mental health. So starting to think about this. And then again, once we have those elements, how do we comprehensively and meaningfully pull those together? So that's it. I'm going to open this up for questions. Know that the last two slides in this deck offer resources that you can refer to and learn more about ecological safety, technological safety, and what goes into it. And of course, I'm a resource too. So thanks for listening. Let me just turn my slide around. And now I can actually say, hey, to you directly. Okay, I'm going to stop and open it up for questions. Thank you for listening.